Okay, welcome everybody. We might, for those who are standing, if you'd like to take a seat, and we'll get started, I think. Welcome to our panel. It's so nice to be here, and thanks for joining this one. I know there's so many fantastic other panels going on at the same time as well. Our panel's titled From Below, the Role of Subnational Governance Efforts in State Building. My name is Peter Yates, and I work with the Asia Foundation as its Associate Director for Governance and also its Australian Partnerships Advisor. I'm currently based in Australia, but previously worked with the Foundation both in Bangladesh and Myanmar as well. From my current role, I'm also privileged to sit as an advisory board member of the Local Public Sector Alliance. If you're not familiar with the LPSA, it's a global alliance that seeks to promote inclusive, equitable societies and sustainable global development by the enhancement and understanding of decentralisation and localisation as complex, cross-cutting and multi-stakeholder reforms. I'm also so privileged to be chairing this fantastic panel today. Our panellists are going to give us all the privilege of taking a full tour across our region, including South Asia, Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Each are deeply knowledgeable and practiced and experienced in subnational governance within the countries in which they operate. Anouk Winoto is a public policy practitioner with more than 20 years of experience managing complex development programs in Indonesia. Her areas of expertise include governance, community-led development, frontline service delivery, public health and nutrition, and social protection. She's a passionate advocate for locally led development and women in leadership. She chairs the IDCC Working Group on Locally Led Development and is part of the DFAT reference group on this issue. Anna is currently AB Indonesia's country representative and strategic advisor in Indonesia. Prior to that, she was the team leader of Compact, a DFAT-funded program to improve basic services in Indonesia. I did ask each of my panellists to also provide a personal note. That's something that's not on their professional biography. Anna was the only one that did this for me, but I'm very grateful. According to Anna, but also many other people, Anna makes the best pecan pie in Jakarta. And apparently there's some floating around, I hear, Anna, in case anyone wants to hit her up afterwards. Dr. Anouk Ride conducts cross-disciplinary research on peace and conflict and environmental issues in Solomon Islands and the Pacific Islands region. She's a research fellow at Australian National University and Solomon Islands National University. Her international experience also includes working for 2 international magazines and several organisations, including the Australian Council of Social Services, Secretariat of the Pacific Community, ABC International, Save the Children, Oxfam, UNDP, World Bank, World Fish, and government departments and ministries in Australia and the Pacific. Well done, Anouk, that's impressive. Bishnu Adhikari is my colleague and good friend, is the Governance Director for the Asia Foundation in Nepal, with over 18 years' experience in the field of civil society, political and electoral systems, and local governance as an advisor and university lecturer. In January 17, Bishnu joined the Foundation's Nepal office as Director for its subnational governance program. Prior to this, Bishnu was Deputy Team Leader of the Economic Policy Incubator, a research and public policy project of DFID at the time, Nepal's, to support subnational economic growth. We are looking forward to a really fantastic discussion day in which you guys are going to take part. The plan is that I'll shortly hand over to Anna, followed by Bishnu and then Anouk to share their presentations. Following this, I hope you guys have some fantastic questions. But before I do this, I want to take you back. I want to take you back to a happy place. You don't need to close your eyes, but I want to take you back to a happy place. I don't want to take you back to that happy place. I don't want to take you back to that happy place. That one? Not even this happy place, if anyone's, it's a bit hard to see, if anyone's a fan of that movie. And I'm actually lying, I want to take you back to a horrible place of COVID lockdowns, okay? I want you to recall the first time you heard about the concept that international borders would be closed, how ludicrous that sounded at the time. And then I want to take you one step further and try and recall when you heard that not only international borders were closed, but that state and territory borders would also be closing. I know for me, I was living in Yangon at the time, and while my family had decided to stay put initially when there were warnings of the international borders closing, It was when we heard from a friend within DFAT that states were going to shut up shop that we jumped on a flight 18 hours later. I think for so many Australians, it was the first time in their life that they stopped to think about the federation in which they live, except perhaps for those strange successionists over in WA who think about nothing else. And for people across the region, it was provincial, regional, state, municipal, city corp, upazila, governments that came to the fore in how they experienced the governance response to the pandemic. But of course, we know these governments, perhaps often forgotten, play an important role every day, pandemic or no pandemic. Despite national level political and governance institutions getting much of the attention, it's local level government, its representatives and its services that citizens rely on most commonly come into contact with. And we know that subnational governance matters for development too. It matters for the 20 of 22 of Australia's closest neighbours who are developing countries. The story of where power lies and how multi-level governance arrangements are conceived and enacted are of critical importance. The story of sharing power across a society or a nation sits at the heart of the pursuit of peace and stability, the pursuit of economic prosperity, and the search for political and governance arrangements that can achieve these outcomes. Let me give you 3 quick examples. The first is China. We should remember that China is one of the most decentralised countries in Asia. And as Yuan Ang and others have pointed out, it was the leveraging of competition and incentives within and between provinces that drove much of the economic growth and poverty alleviation that has occurred over the last few decades. Let me give a not-so-rosy example, Myanmar. Home to the world's longest-running civil war, it was the pursuit of federalism and decentralisation that tied together the peace, economic development and democratic projects that had been underway for more than a decade before the coup of February 2021. And that continues today among those committed to a post-junta Myanmar. And finally, what about this fine city of Canberra, the second fastest growing city in the English-speaking world, I read? It suffers a terrible case of a shortfall in political representation in the upper house of the Australian Parliament. With a population almost on par with and an economy 25% larger than Tasmania's, it's beyond outrageous that power is so malapportioned through the lowly Senate representation of 2 senators for the ACT and 12 for Tasmania. And don't get me started on the National Capital Authority either. You can probably tell I'm one of the 4 people born and bred in Canberra. Anyway, we may well get sidetracked here. So what I mean to say is that where power lies within the governance arrangements of a state matter. And that means it matters in relation to DFAT's prioritisation of effective and accountable states as one of the 4 focus areas of the new international development policy. And it is for both of these reasons that we are going to explore how subnational governance efforts have been contributing to the state building across our region now with our 3 fabulous panellists. Over to our pecan pie fanatic, that would be Anna.
Thanks, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I'll be speaking, taking a slice, that's the pie analogy, thank you very much, of the Compact program, which I led previously, ended in 2022, and some of the work is being continued by Petra, and I want to acknowledge the people who are in this room, who have made amazing contributions to the program. We have Pat Ted over there. He was the director for implementation. So the team leaders may have changed, but the common denominator is this guy. And Ibu Lilis and Dan Woods, you were involved in the program, Nicola and others who were involved in Compact, Ibu Michelle over there. So just a snapshot of decentralization in Indonesia. It's gone through multiple iterations. Started with a very big bang in 1999 when there was huge transition directly to the districts. kind of skipped over the province. Central government was the government was very centralized and then went all the way straight to the district level. It was massive, and then later on, there was a bit of retracting some of that power to province level to help calibrate and help some of the synergies and oversight to the local district governments. Then in 2014 was another major shift when the government decided to go even further to the villages, providing the equivalent of 80,000 Australian dollars per year to the, sorry, that should be 800,000, to the villages, and there were 70,000 at that time. And then recently, there's a reharmonization, looking at how to consolidate the planning and budgeting and try to harmonize the authorities and the fiscal transfers that go to the provinces, districts, and beyond. At present, about half of Indonesia's public spending is spent at the subnational level, province and districts. This is to, when Peter said, check where the power lies with the money, and about 50% of the public funds are at the subnational level. So on Compact, we tried to work within this context of making services work in a decentralized Indonesia with very diverse conditions, diverse ethnicities, very varying fiscal capacities, and so on. We worked on health, education, and civil registry, but for today, I'll just focus on one sector, and that's the civil registry sector. What do I mean by civil registry? It's your basic national identity document. So for children, that means each child has to have a birth certificate, and for adults, it means every adult has to have a KTP, a national identity card. For the citizen, this helps enable their access to health, education, social protection schemes. For the government, it means they have better data for planning, better data for channeling social assistance schemes, better data to make government work better for the people. So civil registration was one of the sectors that we had implemented across all the 7 provinces and 26 districts where we worked. And when you look at the 7 provinces where we worked at the start around 2015, you see that it's quite varied in terms of regional disparities. The achievements in increasing the birth certificate coverage across the 7 provinces. And also part of this disparity picture is between the poor and non-poor. So children who are in a poor family are less likely to have a birth certificate than children who are born to a well-off family. And why is it not higher? Why isn't it universal? It's basically because it's a hassle. It's a hassle for many people who are living in remote villages to have to travel to the district. There's opportunity costs. You have time, money, opportunity costs, and sometimes you don't get the requirements right, or you don't know what you're supposed to bring to the district office, so you end up going back and forth a few times. So I'll be speaking more in detail about 3 different regions where we worked. Aceh province is on the westernmost province of Indonesia. They have special autonomy. So during the decentralization, some provinces were granted special autonomy, which meant they got top-up funds from the central government, and that includes Aceh, and then Papua and Papua Barat. But I'll be speaking also about West Nusa Tenggara. That's part of eastern Indonesia. So what was the problem in Aceh? The earlier slide showed that the initial coverage was actually about 70-ish%, not too bad. But to get it up higher, there were pockets of very low coverage. So how do you address those pockets? So we, together with our local partners and also our national partner, Puskapa and also the Asia Foundation, we tried this new approach of having PRG, Petugas Registrasi Gampong. It sounds fancy, like they're a registrar, but it's essentially a village facilitator. So this village facilitator would go to the village level. They're from that village. They would help the families who don't have their identity cards to collate all the documents. Instead of the citizens having to go back and forth, the village facilitator would actually go for them. So they would take the paperwork, and then once the national identity card or the birth certificate is issued, they would bring them back to the community level. So it saved time, it saved cost, it saved hassle. And initially it was piloted in 3 districts in Aceh, but given that Aceh government has ample funds from special autonomy, we saw the opportunity to figure out ways to integrate this as part of their poverty reduction policy. Of course, an important part of poverty reduction is social protection. An important step to getting social protection out to everyone is getting everyone registered. So the government, with their own funding, expanded to 20 districts using their own funding. There were 3 that didn't buy into that program. And then we have NTB, part of Eastern Indonesia, high poverty rates. And in one of the districts, we saw that there was a very reform-minded new regent, a newly elected Bupati. And he was looking for, he wanted a success. He wanted as many successes as possible in the 100 days of since he was installed. So our team there saw this again as an opportunity, but it was a different model that they needed. They were looking to more cross-sectoral collaboration. How do we make sure that once a baby is born, process the documents right away? Actually, the coverage of birth certificates among under ones is very low. So it's not being done in a timely way. And then for children who are already going to school but they don't have birth certificates yet, how can the civil registry office go to those schools and get them registered? So this was done in North Lombok, and then it was expanded to an additional 3 districts where Kompak was working. And then eventually all 8 districts in West Nusa Tenggara Barat. And this helped with improving the targeting. It helped with their poverty reduction programs. And again, it's using local government budget. You start small and then scale up using the local government budget. And an amazing thing that happened was that during the earthquake of August 2018, it was massive damage, houses, the civil registry office, all the government offices, especially in North Lombok, were collapsed. And people had to move to these tents like this one here. But because the government had already strengthened their CRV, the civil registry system, they were able to still issue those birth certificates for women giving birth in the tents soon after the earthquake. In Papua Barat, a completely different story. I think Petra talked a lot about microdata. The core data is lacking in Papua and Papua Barat. So you can't jump into the civil registry system right away. You have to start with the very basics, which is to make sure that everyone is counted into the village administration and information system. So that's what we focused on in Papua Barat, setting up the Sistem Administrasi Informasi Kampung, or the Village Administration Information System, as the basic foundation to then build up the data on the population. And it serves multiple functions, of course. for planning and budgeting, for social protection targeting, for issuing letters that the citizens need for different things, for village administration. And now the scaling up is happening again with special autonomy funds led by the provincial government, funded by the provincial government. So these different models, even though they were, context-specific, local-specific, the Aceh model was different to NTB, was different to Papua Barat, all of them got accommodated into the national strategy on CRVS, which was endorsed through a presidential decree. So it recognizes that local governments is where the creativity and that responsive services needs to be placed, but you need to offer different implementation and models that work for different areas. It's also part of the business process for collecting data from the village level is what Pa Petra alluded to this morning, is now being adopted into a 400 billion initiative of the Indonesian government called socioeconomic registration. It also introduced ways for more GETSI responsive civil registry services, more active seeking of people who are at home, including elderly, people with disabilities who are not being registered or seen or served by the system at all. And in COVID-19, this flagship activity on CRVS was one of the ones that helped the government in responding quickly. They needed to channel the cash transfers very quickly. They needed to channel all these different schemes for COVID-19 support and response, but they needed the data. And they needed ways to verify who is eligible or not. And so that in the areas where COMPAC had been supporting and working with the local government in strengthening their civil registry system, this was, they were able to do this better. So we were able to do this. Why? Number one is because we had amazing teams led by Pat Ted. They are not just technically qualified, but they have these local political economy insights. We had teams in every province and also in every district where we worked. They had insights, they had the networks, they knew how to identify, here's a good opportunity, here's a new Bupati, I'm gonna sell this to him and he's gonna take off. 4 line ministries, 7 provincial governments, 26 district governments, and also we have people who are helping on the ground through the local partners at the sub-district and village levels. But that's what we needed to do to get the results at national policy, that systems change at the district level and also at the community level. Helping the local governments to identify those funding mechanisms and funding budget line items was very, very useful to then be able to scale up these interventions with their own budgets. And for the CRVS flagship activity, we had a very strong monitoring, evaluation, analytics backing that up, including the formative research and then also some of the qualitative research that helps to explain what works, where, and why. And we had the best fit partners at both national and subnational level. Puskapa, we also work with the Asia Foundation and some local partners, Lembaga Perlindungan Anak, NTB, also Tufts partners on the ground. So what? So what does this mean in this era when there might be, more constrained resources, donor resources, and we can only work at the national level. We're going upstream. We're going for national policy influence. We can't do all that stuff on the ground anymore. Well, I would argue that working on subnational governance is where you get the most bang for the donor buck. Because of course, you can then influence those different types of changes and different levels of change. I'm sure both the government and the donor want to see tangible results on the ground, but they also want to see what does this all add up to in terms of national policy impact. And I think addressing subnational governance enables that. It can lead to impact at multiple levels, from national down to the village level to the community level. And it aligns with the partner governments with whom we work that are decentralized. They're trying to shift more resources, more authority, bringing services closer to the people. And the subnational governance approach works for that. It aligns with the decentralization agenda. It responds to, there's a thirst and appetite among the local governments for change. And I think it's partly also because for example, the district regions, they're elected, so they want to be able to show that they're performing. So there's this appetite, I want to do something that's different from the district next door, I want to be better. So there are opportunities to embrace that and then work with them to leverage the resources that they have. You can have both long-term reforms while also quick results or quick wins. We know that for us who are working on program implementation, there's that push, okay, where are the results? Where's the change? And when you work on subnational governance, you can show the incremental changes. Look, there are early results showing here in this district or in this village or in this province, but then you can contribute to also this longer term change of, okay, these incremental changes are happening at the district level, but then how to shift the SOPs within the service delivery systems, how to shift the behaviors, how to shift the budgeting towards more allocation for the things that should be prioritized. That takes longer. But subnational governance, focusing on the local governments, enables you to do just that. You have short-term results and then long-term reform. So I think that's it from my side. And I will dispel the rumor, there are no pecan pies floating around. They're finished, sorry folks.
Thank you so much, Anna. Such a fantastic starting point for this question. There's no more fundamental state administration task than counting citizens, right? Who makes up the state? And it's amazing that we're coming up on 25 years since that Big Bang moment where you started your story. We're going to move on to a more recent starting point with Bishnu, which is the 2016 constitution which introduced federalism in Nepal now. So I'd like to introduce Bishnu Adhikari.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here. I will spend about 10-15 minutes walking through context. It's where Nepal and what it is doing in terms of the decentralization, and what from the Asia Foundation in partnership with the Australian government we've been trying to contribute to, and what has been some of the early observations, what we are seeing in this transition. So first, a little bit on the context. Nepal moved into a massive Big Bang approach to decentralization through the introduction of federalism, that is what we call, only in 2015. But the context that we have is until 1950, the whole country was closed. In other words, it was a closed society run by a hereditary family for over a century. And in 2050, when we had the first introduction of a short period of democracy, we have about only 2% literacy rate. And within a decade of that, again, the democratic effort slided down. And from 1960 to 90, again, we moved back to a close authoritarian system. However, during that 30 years of period, some local institutions were brought into place, including the district level apparatus as well as the local institutions as elected bodies. However, they were not democratic. The overall context was still close. And then in 90, along with the global trend of second wave of democracy, the country moved into introducing democracy back in 1990. And that context, that opening, provided a lot of opportunities as well as invited challenges, including assertion of the community level, regional level, identity-based groups, as well as politically motivated groups that expanded for a decade from 1996 to 2005, which many of you might recall that we had this active conflict led by the Maoists as well as the assertion of the regional forces. And in 2006, the country moved into a political settlement through the signing of the peace accord, and for a decade, the country again deliberated on what sort of political settlement that the elite and the country would like to. And through 2 rounds of Constituent Assembly elections, the country got a new constitution in 2050. It has many aspects, but one of the key elements that we would like to draw from that process is what we call shifting from a unitary system to a decentralized, more horizontal division of power. So on the left hand, as you could see here, we had about 2 centuries of very hierarchical centralized system with the central government division at the district zonal level as well as the local government units. And moving into more horizontal structure with federal government, 7 provinces, and the local units, which basically have been reconfigured from about 4,000 local government units to 753. And also a very clear division of executive, legislative, and some partial judicial function across all 3 layers, with more defined exclusive functions divided across all 3 levels. And the most important feature of it is more affirmative measures, including at the local level. Local mean the municipal level. So in essence, to sum up, what this move is about is devolution of power from the center to the local, and in order to do that, how to create more inclusive society and more inclusive state. In that context, what was the role of the Asia Foundation and the Australian government? As the development partner for about 6 decades for the Australian government and for 3 decades for the Asia Foundation, we saw this as a very unique opportunity to accompany this massive move towards devolution. And in doing that, we wanted to be relevant with the Nepal government across all 3 levels, particularly addressing 3 sets of key problems. As I was trying to explain, even though there is now clarity in terms of some level of exclusive functions across 3 levels, there are equally lack of clarity or overlapping functions. So there is competing situation at all 3 levels. And in doing that, as the power is now shifted towards the subnational level, there is still huge amount of discontent and disagreement. The political settlement that we have is still considered to be temporary. There are still huge disputes. Also, as I was trying to give you a picture at the local level, now that we have this local government with quite clear constitutional guarantee and some exclusive function, the access and the participation of citizens at that level it's still very limited. It doesn't mean that automatically by creating these local units, the community and the citizen, apart from the election, they would have easy access. So those are still an area that we're trying to explore or still very difficult. And the engagement of citizen at large is still a challenge. So in this context, what have we been trying to do? What was our game was that how do we create this condition so the whole shape towards devolution could continue to progress, and therefore in the long run, at least at the subnational level, we're able to create more stable, effective, and inclusive subnational government. That is where we saw as our relevancy in stuff at the national or at the macro level. However, we have adopted this approach of working across all levels, but our intention, our aim, our focus was always at the subnational level. And as many other programs, we try to adopt this adaptive, flexible approach to responding to these opportunities, as well as respond to the subnational government primarily, as well as where we had opportunity, position ourselves to provide necessary support at the provincial and also at the federal level. And the last, but for us the most tricky and the most difficult and sometimes not new but very difficult situation is government would always like us to be providing capacity, infrastructure, give us the money and then you disappear, versus we trying to negotiate and retain that position to be able to ask the question that what we call is the accountability part. So that's what we try to employ as our primary approach to engaging. So what have we done, what the subnational governance program between the Asia Foundation and the Australian government in partnership with the local government and the civil society, what have we contributed so far? There are a number of areas where we feel we have constantly been investing through civil society as well as through government. But in summary, I would like to say only in 3 areas, which is creating platforms, forums for divergent groups and the government to come together and debate, have their disagreement put on the table, and that is allowing them to come together and understand each other and build some trust. We have been focusing constantly, very deliberately to generate evidence, knowledge, and data as we've been to this new discourse, new field. There were insufficient data and evidence what this system is about, whether the decentralization or devolution of federalism is the right path for Nepal to go or not. So there was still lack of evidence, lack of knowledge, and in that sector, we try to partner with the local civil society think tanks to generate enough evidence. And particularly at the subnational level, we supported the local government where we were confronted with the opportunities to offer model and sample or the process for developing more inclusive policies as their foundational policy. So these 3 been the key areas where this program has been trying to be relevant or contributing to. So what has been our key observations or learning so far in accompanying this massive shift towards devolution, massive way towards federalization in the country? And I'd like to assert with these 3 as my summary statement, which is working at the subnational level is relatively predictable and relatively stable, which is prerequisite for building ownership, building trust. Without that, no development programs whatsoever would be possible. So I was trying to give you the context that we have now moved into the second round of elections since 2017. However, the country is still fragile. We already saw a couple of shifts at the federal level with the coalition government. However, at the subnational level, we noted some level of stability. So working at the subnational level is more predictable, more stable than at the federal level. Secondly, locally led policy reforms initiatives and the implementation is more possible. And that was evident particularly during the COVID period. As we have noted in many other contexts that when the government confronted with that crisis, they tried to take over all the decision making at the central level. I think there was sudden realization that it has to be centralized, or there is to be just one center for making every decision and responding to the crisis. Nepal tried the same thing, but it didn't work. And it allowed for the subnational government to find their own way, innovate their ways to respond to it, and that proved to be more efficient, more effective. So whether that is creating the quarantine center or testing or providing immediate relief, or dissemination of information. So the local government appeared to be more quicker in responding to the crisis, as well as introducing some innovations and implementing policies at the subnational level. And finally, because of that ability to be quick and efficient in responding to the crisis as well as opportunity, what we have seen in the last 6 years to this new trend, public are gradually beginning to trust local government over the province or the federal government. So since 2017, we have been conducting a national public opinion poll, and each of these polls, a majority of the Nepali citizens are showing their greater interest towards the local government when it is compared to the province or at the federal level. As well as when we move into this new context into 2015 and prior to the 2017 elections, there were narrative that the local government now has unnecessarily been overburdened, whether they are going to be able to take the responsibility as entrusted by the Constitution or not. So there was a huge amount of distrust, curiosity, and criticism against the local government. So just in the second round of elections, because of their ability to respond to many of the local challenges as well as opportunities, we believe that now people are trusting more to the local government, and at the macro level, at the national level, we don't see the same kind of criticism or the narrative that, oh, the local government has too much of power. So therefore, in the long run, if the local government were to be interested and provided necessary support, they have high probability of responding to the local need, and therefore, as being closer to the citizen, the state-citizen relation would in the long run be strengthened, and therefore building this stable and democratic society could be gained from bottom. So with that, let me sum up my few slides, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Bishnu, and we'll definitely get you to be answering questions shortly. I wanted to draw out two pieces of language that you used when you were talking about both the role of the Australian government and the role of your program. You use the language accompany government and want to be relevant to the Nepal government in what is a pretty fundamental state-building effort and reorganisation of power within the country as well, and I think that's a useful part to pull out further when we get to the Q&A bit when it comes to the how question. We're now going to move on to Dr. Anouk Ride, going to be speaking about Solomon Islands, obviously, and where some of those fundamental questions of power sharing within a sort of a state-building frame are front and centre for national politics, for how the country engages with its region, and obviously for its citizens as well. So over to you, Anouk.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'd like to just initially acknowledge the Indigenous landowners and the Ngunnawal people and pay respect to their elders. I'd also like to, since we're in a learned institution, acknowledge that Indigenous people were the first scientists and social scientists, and that has contributed greatly to the knowledge of this institution and of my field that I'll be talking about today. Thank you again to Peter for the lovely introduction. So I won't talk too much about myself, other than to say that I lived in Solomon Islands for 15 years and worked as an applied researcher. So that's why the long list of agencies that I've worked with in the past. I'm now based here in Canberra at the ANU in the Department of Pacific Affairs. Okay, so I'm going to take you to a different place, a different setting, but maybe with some parallels to our previous speakers. And, sorry, let me see if this is happening. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to take you now to the Solomon Islands. Now, there's many things we could talk about in relation to the Solomon Islands, but relevant for this discussion, it's important to know that even though it's a small country, it has incredible diversity of people and environment. So there's around 70 language groups, and quite diverse in environmental situations, some living on small atolls, other people living on larger islands, and some quite remote islands in the Pacific. The Solomon Islands is a nation of indigenous people, and the way that this is represented in their government is through national and provincial government, and there's 9 provinces currently in the Solomon Islands. Below the level of provincial government, there's no local level government in the official sense, but there is, of course, traditional governance, and chiefs and churches play a key role in local level governance. Solomon Islands has low levels of human development on most of the SDGs, as was talked about this morning, and it's also a post-conflict, post-colonial country. The conflict in Solomon Islands finished in 2003, but we can say that in some senses there's a negative peace since then and many live conflict issues. Solomon Islands, of course, has large investments of aid, and the media has recently brought this to our attention, the geopolitical competition and how that relates to aid as well. So in relation to provincial governance, we can kind of say there was a bit of an attention deficit disorder in the intervention that happened in 2003 and generally in the development sector since. So Australian policy in relation to Solomon Islands was clearly about state building, but a focus on national state building. So there was large programs in law and justice sector, in the finance sector and others, but largely aimed at national institutions and strengthening national institutions. Solomon government policy has had a mixed record. Decentralization has been a theme even prior to independence in the aspirations of leaders, but in terms of how it's been operationalized, it's been a mixed record. There's a long history there. In terms of aid, there have been programs specifically aimed at provincial government, largely from the World Bank and the EU. And these programs have been engaged in training advisors and small grant programs. But those programs themselves have been somewhat set without active involvement sometimes of provincial governments and are provided in that sort of capacity development frame. And the latest governance assistance to Solomon Islands was almost entirely long-term advisors or short-term advisors, so using advisors as a key mode of delivery. Now, this maybe attention deficit disorder in relation to subnational governance is not surprising because we can also see it in academic and policy literature. There's a few exceptions worth reading if you do want to understand more about how provincial governance works in the Solomon Islands. One is a paper by Melanie Phillips. It was published by ANU as well, What We Can Learn from Provincial Governance, which is based on her experience as a practitioner. The Truth and Reconciliation Report, which was a massive process and a massive research report, actually has quite a large section on provincial governance and the roles that provincial level leaders played during the conflict and peace process, but also what this means for how development could build peace building within the country. And then also UNDP commissioned a survey And it was interesting, they sort of asked in an open-ended way what Solomon Islanders' suggestions were for peace in the country, and two themes came up. One is employment, and the second one is devolution of power to the provinces. So I've provided a quote there. I won't read the quote, but it just points out that there was a report early after the intervention, which we call RAMSI, the Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands, in 2003, written by John Cox and Joanne Morrison, and it was provided to AusAid, and it did point to the needs for provincial government. It emphasized that the challenges that provincial government face are very similar to those the national government faces, such as corruption and the need for stronger financial systems. But it also had this sort of sentence which now seems somewhat prophetic, which it said that if provincial government is not invested in, then it may have the potential to become a disruptive influence in national political life, undermining unity, peace building, and good governance initiatives elsewhere. Okay, so then time passed and we had some big wake-up calls, particularly in the last 5 years. The first wake-up call was COVID-19, and it sort of coincided with the second wake-up call, which was the AAC communique. So basically the COVID-19 outbreak pointed to what my colleagues have just talked about from other countries, which is that when you have a diverse set of islands that are quite remote from each other, providing all services from a centralized national approach is not very effective. And so while there were some strengths in the COVID response and preparations, there was a lot of weaknesses as well. And it sort of reached the point where the health system more or less broke down. People who had COVID were told to go home. And in the Solomon Islands context, it's not uncommon to have a home with 10 or more people living in it. So the COVID virus rapidly spread because there was no facilities to hold people who had the virus and isolate them. And there were other breakdowns in the system as well, such as people not being able to get basic medicines, and those who had secondary health conditions, there were many who died. So the COVID-19 situation again renewed the province's desires for more control at the national level over spending, over staffing, over the allocation of resources. And at a similar time, we had a very popular leader arise in Winoto province, which is the most populous province in Solomon Islands. His name is Daniel Swidani. You may have seen him in the media. Okay, so Daniel Swidani and his executive came up with this AAC communique, which became world famous and broke headlines everywhere, because part of the provisions in the AAC communique, which was a communique aimed at the national government, it was to tell donors, the national government and other development partners what the Winoto provincial government wanted at that time and what the executive wanted at that time. And so it had a provision in there that there should be no investment associated with the Chinese Communist Party. But it had many other provisions, and many other provisions were actually about that it wanted more control over which aid projects would come to the province, wanted involvement in design, and also in assessing, the effectiveness of these development projects in the province. So the AAC communique became a hot political issue, but it reflected actually a long-standing grievance that not only Winoto province, but other provinces had about not having enough control over their staffing levels, their budgets, which projects were being rolled out in their provinces, and how, and the accountability of those projects as well. So both of these things actually made people think, well, maybe there's different ways to engage with subnational governance. And it was a very funny experience because I've worked with provincial governments on different projects for many years, and one of the complaints has always been that, international NGOs and other high-level visitors never visit the provincial government. They always go to the Prime Minister and, maybe the ministry and whoever their partner agencies are and so forth. But they don't actually come and, sit down and visit the provincial government offices. And so we had this kind of joke, like all of a sudden, the provincial government's offices were being inundated by visitors because they realized that the provinces can have a veto role in projects and activities within their province, and that these international NGOs and donors and so forth needed to engage at the subnational level. So practices began to change because of these two shocks. So the wake-up calls continue, and they're live to this day. So the premiers have meetings, and they had a meeting in Gizo in April this year, and they signed what they call the Gizo Communique. It's not widely known outside of Solomon Islands, but it's an interesting sort of document to read to get a sense of where this is heading in terms of politics, conflict, and development. So it's signed by all of the premiers across the 9 provinces, and it demands adoption of a proposed revenue sharing scheme. In a positive development, this is actually going to happen. So the share of revenue that the province gets, or the budget, sorry, is going to go apparently from 3 to 15%. This Gizo Communique also calls for more provincial powers for infrastructure, investment, human resources, scholarships. It's got a whole set of requests things that the premiers want to advance. It calls for the return of alienated lands, which is a hot conflict issue in the Solomons. It was part of the set of grievances that led to for people from Guadalcanal to form militant groups and to initially fight and start the civil war from 1998 to 2003. One of the grievances from Guadalcanal people was that their lands had been alienated and used for example, the capital city and other developments, but the indigenous people, the owners of those lands, had not received adequate benefits from that development. So this has been a hot conflict issue for many years, and it's again surfaced in the Gizo Communique as something that needs to be progressed according to the provinces. And it states that a federal system of government is not negotiable. I think Solomon Islands has played around for a long time with the idea of having a decentralized system, maybe something that looks like federalism, maybe something that looks like more autonomy for the provinces. But progress has been slow. And so they're looking for more of a state government or an autonomous kind of status for the provinces. Okay, now this is my least evidence-based slide because it really is my personal opinion. And it's based on working with provincial government staff for a long period of time. And what I see is some of the benefits that can be applied for peace building and development. Okay, firstly, it's physically more accessible to get services, to engage with your leaders if you're in the province. So that each province is made up of wards, and those wards are usually the most accessible form of official government that you can access. Provincial government leaders also often, so if I go back to my slide here, maybe to explain, give you a story, hold on. Oh, whoops, sorry, I'm going before. Yep, where am I going? Yep. Okay. I warned Peter that I would do something technologically incompetent as part of this presentation. That was it, I'm done. Okay. So if we look at this picture, this is actually a good example. So this is the Premier of Guadalcanal Province. He's the man in the middle with the traditional jewelry, and he is officiating a welcoming ceremony for foreign visitors who came for the South Pacific Games. And the provincial leaders, they have this role of officiating and facilitating access to the province, but also many local reconciliations. So if there's disputes between local tribes, it's often not the national government that are getting involved, but the provincial level leaders, at least as first responders. The second thing that we find in local subnational governance is that when a disaster happens, and Solomon Islands is the second most at risk of disasters in the world, according to the World Risk Report, so disasters are frequent. But when disasters happen, it's often provincial government staff that are the first responders, or other agencies that are based in the provincial level, some of the international NGOs and so forth. They have a higher degree of flexibility in terms of how they spend their budgets, and they can often move their budgets around a bit more flexibly than government ministries that are very donor-focused and everything's sort of tied up. There's also a greater degree of women and youth participating in provincial level politics. And this is partially due to the fact that there's less money politics to be elected to provincial level. You're not expected to spend a lot of money and sort of convince people through different things to the same degree as you are on the national level. So it tends, provincial level governance tends to attract people that have a profile in their community for a different reason. Maybe they're a teacher or a chief or whatever, and then they get involved as an elected representative to their province. And some provinces have also taken innovative steps to increase gender and social inclusion, such as having quotas for women in either the executive or elected bodies as well. And then the other benefit for provincial governments for peace building is that they can act as a coordinating agency for the provincial level actors. And this has actually been an area of great progress in the last 10 years. So some of the services, such as gender-based violence services and others, now are coordinated on a provincial level, which vastly improves service delivery to Solomon Islanders. Okay, so what needs to happen? What are the changes that have happened, and what needs to happen? Well, the changes that we've seen, particularly in the last 5 years, but probably before as well, is that provincial governments now have more influence over project design because of this veto power that they have. There's also a recognition in several strategies and policy documents about the need for decentralization, particularly of service delivery. So health, education, agriculture and fisheries all have good decentralization initiatives as part of their national policies and are working towards these. That's a kind of power sharing where we're talking about service delivery being done by people in the province and having more provincial level controls over the projects and service delivery is not as well extended into the justice system and police. So one of the complaints, for example, of provincial level leaders is that they don't necessarily have a say over who their local provincial police commander is. These people are appointed from Honiara, and there's not necessarily a process for accountability of police that are assigned from Honiara to provincial level leaders. And as I mentioned, another positive change has been gender and social inclusion. And I think this Gizo communique, although controversial and far from accepted by all political actors and even development actors, it does demonstrate a renewed cooperation amongst the premiers themselves to move the system of governance forward. So needs in terms of the development sector, how can the development sector assist, and what are some of the things that we can be thinking about when we're doing project design and so forth? Okay, the first thing is that we need more professional staff in the provinces with reporting responsibilities to the provincial executive. Funding needs to be flexible to respond to the high degree of disasters and conflicts that arise at the provincial level. There needs to be more support for collaborative networks. So I've highlighted the good role model or the good practice that's been set by gender-based violence services, having coordination meetings at the provincial level, police, women's organizations, government working together. But that doesn't happen across all sectors. So those kind of collaborative networks at island level. And then we need to move more towards collaborative relationships between provincial and national institutions for development and peace building. So when the whole Swidani China national government controversy happened, it inflamed tensions around this issue. Now we need to sort of move back to, well, how are the provinces and the national government going to work together for best outcomes on development and peace building? The Vice-Chancellor of the Solomon Islands National University and a colleague, we put together a piece which was based on his idea of a blueprint. How do we start dialogue around these issues of government to have something that's more responsive to the cultural diversity of the islands, and also these structural and situational conditions we find ourselves in. And I'll refer to that at the end. But there is some ideas about how we can maybe take this out of the heated political space it's been and put it back into a space of what kind of governance does Solomon Islands want, and how would the national and provincial government relate to each other in that system. We do need more accountability of aid and donors at the provincial level. It is increasing, but by no means universal, that donors and partners will be working well with the provincial governments to establish priorities and to run their projects. And finally, we need more research and analysis on this topic so that we can think about what do we need to know to have a graduated plan for devolution of responsibilities to the provincial government level. So the blueprint to stop strife, it's available on the Lowy Institute. It's just a short blog. And it points for a way forward to sort of start that dialogue. And so Transform Akarau and myself wrote that unless a new structure of power sharing is established, Solomon Islands will be vulnerable to repeated strife that will require outside intervention to resolve. And we were referring specifically to the riots in November 2021, which arose in part due to some of these grievances. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. It's a real privilege to hear the Solomon Islands story told with such knowledge and expertise and insight. So we really appreciate that. As forewarned at the start of the session, we are very keen for this to be a discussion with questions. I also know that there's a lot of knowledge in the room itself. So if you're the kind of person that is really good at concise comments, I really welcome comments feeding in. If you're not so good at concise commentary, maybe just frame it as a question. But I'd love to open up the floor now to anyone who'd like to ask our panellists a question or make a concise comment. We've got first one right down the bottom here, and first, and then we'll go behind there second, and then up there first.
I'm going to try and make this a concise question. I can't do concise comments. I'm bursting at the seams here. I'm a creature of local government. I've worked in local government for about 17 years in Australia. I did a volunteer assignment with the Australian Volunteers Program with Dulikal Nagapalika, helping them with their integrated urban development plan. And urban planning, so I'm really interested, Bishnu, and also Anouk, what I'm interested in is the professional capacity of particularly like urban planning in these sort of transformative times where, you know, local government's given responsibility really for the first time to run with it, but urban planners are generally consultants, or they have engineers in the municipalities, and it's such a critical role. So, I mean, this goes with, I guess, any of the sort of like practitioners at that level. So the Australian government has assisted with, you know, that sort of high level transformation, but what's happening at the grassroots level, at the counter?
Awesome. I am going to test my panellist memory by taking a couple of questions at the same time. So we'll go here. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be really quick then. My name's Ryan. I'm from ANU. I think my question is for Anna. Would you be able to please just elaborate a little bit on what the new harmonisation wave of reforms looks like in particular? And I'm curious, because I haven't been paying attention for a couple of years, I'm wondering if that's in a de facto re-centralisation in pushback to some of the criticisms that the sort of village level decentralisations have encountered over time. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, Bishnu, if you want to go first on the urban planning question, and then Anna on harmonisation, and then we'll go to that question up there next.
Thank you. That's really critical question. Quick response. Urban planning, there's a possibility of providing and lending technical solution over political. What we're yet to be seen at the subnational level or at the municipality level is at the political level realizing that there has to be a bare minimum agreement, consensus amongst the politicians before they could get in the technical solution. So under the subnational governance program, we've been working across 7 provinces with 7 municipalities primarily, but also with additional municipalities. So the first support, for example, that we provided that I was trying to allude is to provide the data by collecting information from at the local level, creating the municipal profile, and present that to the politicians. So this is what your municipality looks like, this is the population, this is the income, this is the literacy, etc., etc. So based on these data, how would you like to prioritize? How would you like to focus your attention immediate to the long term? And what has been our experience so far is that political consensus amongst the elected leaders would take time because this is the first time that they now have this opportunity to engage in the deliberations, negotiation, and make those compromises. I think once that is that status is reached, the technical solution, for example, the urban plan or the revenue improvements or the service delivery, all these technical solutions could be easier, and where we have been really been very, very careful from the subnational governance program is not offering the technical solution before there is this bare minimum political agreements. We're yet to get to that stage that our technical solution for a good urban planning could be implemented.
Great, thank you, Bishnu. Yeah, that's great. And over to Anna.
Yeah, on the harmonization in the first slide that I showed at different points in time where there was decentralization, took it another step further. There have been 2 separate legislation, one on autonomy, regional autonomy, and then one on the fiscal aspects. So in the last iteration, those 2 laws were consolidated. That's what's meant by harmonization. So it's no longer two parallel laws, one on the authority that's being delegated to the provinces and districts, and then one on the fiscal transfers. It's being consolidated into one. That's essentially what it is.
Great, thank you. We've got a question up the back, and then we'll come down to the delegate in green here.
Okay, so thank you. Pardon my English. My name is Lilis from DFED Scala program. So I would like to know from Nepal and Solomon, because we have similarities related to challenging geographical location like islands, and then also mountainous for Nepal. It's just similar to Indonesia. I guess that's one of the challenge is limited budget for regional, for the local government, and how do you strengthen the local government in terms of the scarcity of the budget and funds in order to making sure the basic services are fulfilled? Thanks.
Great, and just come down the front for the second question before.
Thanks. This is actually to all the panelists, but actually just triggered by your point, Anouk, about that kind of rapid shift to seeing a whole lot of VIP delegates and international visitors coming to the subnational level. I guess I'm wondering whether across the panelists you've seen that because of those wake-up calls, have you seen a shift not only in that sort of visits, but actually an increased appetite for donor investments at the subnational level, I guess in contrast to that kind of scary statistic that you put up, Anouk, around that governance program, which was very recent and still focused at the national level with predominantly LTA, STA. So yeah, are you seeing a translation into actual donor investments being targeted at the subnational level and locally led?
Great, who wants to tackle? Yeah.
Thank you, that's again really important question. As we in the development sector, we always struggle with that question. And from our experience so far, working across all levels, and particularly with focusing at the subnational, at the municipal level, our observation is often the scarcity of resources is not the first question. It is how they prioritize, what they prioritize, and what realistically the elected officials promise to. So the context of Nepal is, again, except few municipalities, they rely with the federal transfer. So in other words, the local government do not have the revenue base to fulfill the mandate that they have. So they have quite a long mandate, including, as I mentioned, executive and also legislative. Interestingly enough, I'm not aware whether that is the case in any other federal system in Nepal. The municipal government can legislate their own laws from the exclusive list that they have, plus some judicial function in terms of facilitating the civil dispute resolution at the local level through the elected officials. So what I mean is they have such a long list of mandate, however, they don't have the resources to be able to fulfill that mandate on top of what the citizen expectation that they have. However, what we see is the struggle in appropriately prioritizing as well as negotiating with with a party within the municipality. So until 2017, we had about 2 decades of gap at the local level. So the local elite had this practice of sharing the spoils amongst themselves instead of really deliberating on the merits of the plan, merits of the proposal. And that legacy is still in existence in Nepal. So in other words, that the local democratic institutions should function based on the merit, based on the priority that they could negotiate. So that is where we find in Nepal.
Great. Anouk, do you want to have a go at the second question?
Yeah, I'll just comment generally about the 2 questions together. I think they're both really interesting questions, and thank you. I think what I've been saying to donors particularly is, Solomon Islands is a fragile context. The risk of conflict is there, and it's still there with us today, even 20 years after the war ended. So in this context, we have community-level governance, the chiefs, the church and women leaders. We have the provincial level governance. We have the national level governance. A wise investment strategy would be like any of these could fall down anytime. So let's invest in all of them and try and make all of them as effective as possible. Now, in relation to what you're talking about, which is a tricky issue, like how do you balance the needs of a local area versus, national standards and these things, I think it can be simplified if we think about it like this. The national government is there to make national laws, and it's there to set the standards for, some of these larger development projects that we all engage with. The provincial level government is there to know where to do stuff and what to do and to do it. So more autonomy in the funding that they have, more autonomy to hire their own LTAs or STAs. This will help the provinces be more effective in responding to issues that they are facing, health, education, disasters, all of these different things. I think where we've got stuck is we don't think about subnational governments in an integrated way, like, okay, how can strengthening it actually help the national system? We don't think about the reforms that need to happen to the national system and some of these large development projects to really recognize subnational governance. So we need to connect the dots, I think, on all of these issues. And there was a final point that I was going to make, which is, so the desire now from provincial governments is, give us the kind of support that you've been giving to the national government, just a flexible fund that we could use to hire an STA to get a document done or a feasibility study done. Some funding that we can just keep the lights on and so forth, and we don't have to go through, political negotiations about our basic running costs and so forth. And these are sector-based, requests as well as the provincial government requests. So I think if we can think about, the provincial governments as the doers, the national governments as the standard holders and, the legislators in many senses, then we can work for a constructive engagement where we work at both levels.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anouk. We do have lots of questions, so I might go on. We've got one here and then...
Thank you very much for all of the presentations. I was particularly interested in the Solomon Islands case and was wondering how the dynamics might change if there is more resources than at the provincial level rather than at the national level. What the issues you were stating affect dynamics at the national level, how much would that transfer down to the provincial level around money politics and things like that? The other aspect of it is to what extent, and maybe that's across the panelists, is your consideration around performance-based transfers to provincial governments? Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then up the back here. Yeah.
My name is Nemat. I'm from Development Policy Center, ANU. Very informative and insightful panel. My question is from Bishnu. You stated that we are unsure about the outcome of the federalization process in Nepal. My question is, first, was it an exclusive part of elite bargaining process without a popular demand for federalization or such a reform? And the second issue is, can you elaborate, isn't it a high-risk political reform process without being sure or to be unsure about the outcome? Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I might go to Anouk first on the performance-based transfer question and then come back to you.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I should preface what I've said so far about provincial governments in general. The large provincial governments are functioning relatively well. Some of the smaller provincial governments are really struggling to do what we would consider basic government functions. So it is a diverse situation, which makes conditional funding a bit hard because you don't want to, totally deny those provinces that are running behind funding, but you do want to have, incentives within the system to reward good practices. So it's a conundrum. If you solve it, please to let me know, because it's something we think about quite a lot, and it's a hard one to fix. I think, too, I didn't fully address your question before, which is, are funds now coming down to the subnational government level? No, they are not. What is happening is that, bigger projects are more often partnering with subnational level, which is good. But like I say, that kind of grant level funding, flexible funding, the provinces don't have it, and it's a major obstacle to several different sectors, I would say. And I think finally we need to establish a political consensus, obviously, for the way forward, how you balance power between the national and the subnational governance. But I would say that I'm just writing a piece that will be published in a few weeks, and we point to a long list of both political documents and parliamentary inquiries and other things that have said we want a more of a federalized system. So there's a strong consensus amongst people in general and most institutions that this is desirable, but there will be political costs for certain political leaders to get there, and it's navigating those waters that gets a bit tricky in these discussions.
Fantastic. So Bishnu on elite bargaining or not, and how much of a gamble?
Thank you. That's a question we as a Nepali every day have already started asking ourselves after 6 years of this experiment. Yes, it was a compromise made by the political elite. However, in terms of some power being devolved at the local level, so as the country move into this new structure, we have what we call 3 tiers of government, the federal, province, and the local. And by design, province are the new offshoot. However, we had in the past development structure as intermediary between the local and the central government. So we name this as provincial elected governing unit, but they are the weakest one as compared to many other federal systems around the world. I think it's, again, an exception. To the extent like the provincial government, like in India, the federal government has the prerogative to dissolve when it wants, whereas the local government has the constitutional guarantee for 5 years. So to respond to your question, what we would like to believe is the extent of function and power that has been devolved to the local government, which is the municipal government, there is a possibility that being retained at the local level for a couple of reasons, and I would like to mention two. One is the affirmative provision. So at the local level, 40% of the elected positions are reserved for the women, of which 20% are for the extremely marginalized minority groups. So this is the first time that this level of access being demonstrated at the local levels, and we would like to believe that these are the people who would assert if there is an attempt to withdraw that power and function. Secondly, the amount of resources. So under the previous dispensation until 2015, the central transfer to the local government for the development used to be only around 3%. Now, on average, we have about 30% central transfer of fund at the local level. So in other words, the local elected leaders now have the opportunity to exercise their power as well as power over how they want to distribute and manage their resources. And therefore, the story that I was trying to explain earlier is if they choose to make the right decision, that they have the opportunity. And in these 6 years, we have been seeing that indication in a number of local government that they are indeed interested and committed to make that difference. However, the federal structure, it's a big question. We don't know. It is, I think, too early for us to make a conclusive assessment.
Bishnu, you've nailed it. It's literally 1 o'clock. You've like absolutely nailed it on the nose. So let me say a couple of thank yous. Thank you to our panel. Really, really fantastic, and appreciate your time. Thank you to the audience for your concise questions and lack of inconcise commentary. And thank you to the staff with the microphones and the tech guys as well. Go and enjoy lunch.